Hi, I just published my second book, Becoming Nothing, which is a pseudonymous work of philosophy that explores the existential dialectic and its relationship between its three modes of being, the aesthetic, the ethical, and the religious, as they are explored and experienced by these individuals, the aesthetic, the ethical, and the religious individuals. And why I say experienced here, as experienced by the aesthetic, the ethical, and the religious, is because these three modes of being, the aesthetic, the ethical, and the religious, are explored and experienced as they are experienced through the eyes of these individuals themselves. This aesthetic, this ethical, and the religious man, not through the eyes of a third person, but through their own eyes. And in this book, I do not present a formal argument or a case as if I'm trying to convince someone else, but it is as if it is a set of writings that someone might write in their diary or a journal of some sort. And that is precisely the narrative upon which this book is built. I choose a pseudonym to write under, as this is a pseudonymous work. I chose a pseudonym by the name of Yusuf Meraki. And this guy, Yusuf, he stumbles upon the writings, you can say a diary, which it seems to him had been in the possession of not one but three individuals in the past. As absurd as it may seem, this diary he stumbles upon had been in the possession of three individuals whose lives closely resemble the aesthetic, the ethical, and the religious. Now, I chose to write under a pseudonym for several reasons. The first one being that it creates this dissonance, this gap, this distance between the personality and the ideas of the author and the personality and the ideas of the perceived author or the character or the pseudonym, and it allows the reader to engage with the pseudonym instead of the author. And it also allows the reader to engage in self some sort of internal self dialogue with the pseudonym. It also allows for contradiction as well. And this book is nothing but a grand contradiction, I believe. It is full of contradictions that is visible throughout the book. For example, towards the beginning of the work, this individual who's writing in their diary, who is the writer of this work, this individual proposes a theory or some sort of an experiential proof for the non-existence of God based on the problem of evil, and later he refutes his own theory towards the end of the book. And moreover, he presents some sort of an argument, a grand unification theory which seeks to reconcile the differences between evolution and creationism, and later he refutes his own theory. He first believes towards the beginning of the book that pleasure is the utmost good in life. Later he refutes his own belief and now believes that virtue is the way of life. So this book is nothing but a grand contradiction. It is full of contradictions that is visible throughout the book. And this progression, these series of metamorphoses, plural, are very important to be noted here. And it is precisely this progression which could not have otherwise been appropriately captured in a book where I might have just presented a case or a formal argument. Now, the narrative is so far that this pseudonym Yusuf Meraki, he finds the papers or the writings of these three individuals, the aesthetic, the ethical, and the religious, and these papers form the entirety of this book. But before we get to the narrative itself and to these characters and their beliefs and their theories and their ideas, I'd like to go through very briefly through some of the theories which I present in this book. And for this, I'll read a part of the preface of the book. What has plagued my being for the past many months is none other than being itself. What has consumed my days and nights is the very thing of which many claim complete certainty, and in this are more ignorant than certain. But I have found this and this alone, that there is no certainty in matters of philosophical nature. I sought to know being, and in this I was left more unsure than I initially was. For each query led to more and more questions, and I was no closer to any answer which I now wonder may not even be within reach. I sought to journey to the heart of being so that I could see and know for myself how it was that from it and through it emerged the many varieties of modes which I cannot even distinguish from one another. For if I must know this with unwavering surety, I must either have lived in accordance with it to know, or I must know the inward from the outward. And I can say now with the only certainty with which I am equipped that I am a stranger to both. I sought to know, and the only thing that has come to my knowledge thus far is that I do not, in fact, know at all. I am nonetheless no less than a traveler through the fields of knowledge, and I will not rest until I have made my way through it to reach the life giving pools of wisdom. I am far from being wise, that is only true, but I seek to understand how it is the case that being manifests itself in the many diversities that are no less apparent to us than our own face in the mirror, and how these many modes converge and even transcend each other and themselves to become a part of something even greater. It has always amazed me how the same earth produces such varying modes, and these two in turn produce further variations. And with respect to this kind of being that man possesses, it is no less fascinating how greatly man differs from another in terms of its mode, which again is always in flux. So, being, existence is what this book revolves around. Many philosophers have tried to explore being, have explored existence, and have explored its modes and how they transcend each other, and have tried to develop some sort of a system which through which it can be easier to grasp these modes and how they transcend each other, such as Hegel and others like Kierkegaard have critiqued such systems. Hegel presents his system, his synthesis, his view of dialectics, and Kierkegaard rejects the Hegelian view of dialectics and instead proposes his existential dialectic, which is fundamentally individualistic. Now, Kierkegaard's existential dialectic is you can say is that of a choice between these three modes of being, between the aesthetic, the ethical, and the religious, and it does not at all involve, according to Kierkegaard at least, any sort of reason or rationality, and it is precisely through a leap of faith that you can transcend one mode to enter the domain of the next, such as transcending the aesthetic to enter into the religious domain, ethical domain, or transcending the ethical domain to enter the religious domain. While reason and rationality are key to Kant's moral principles, Kierkegaard believes that while it may be rational to live the ethical mode of being, it is not rational to choose this mode of being. According to him, it's not at all reasonable to choose the ethical life over the aesthetic life. There's no sane man who would, out of his own reason and his own rationality, choose the ethical life over the aesthetic life. And he's relatively skeptical about the perpetuation of some sort of a universal principle of rationality, and that is why he rejected most of Hegelian philosophy. So, according to Kierkegaard, if you choose to live the ethical mode of being, you are choosing to live a life of rationality, but the actual choosing itself, it is nowhere near a rational choice that you would make. And according to Kierkegaard, this ethical individual follows the demands of conscience. He follows the rules of morality in a Kantian sense, but not for Kantian reasons. He does it instead out of pure lust or pure passion for virtue itself, for he believes that virtue is the utmost good in life, not pleasure, opposed to what the aesthetic man believes. And it is also not because this ethical individual has worked out some logical system, some logical view according to which living the ethical life is the utmost good, or due to which the categorical imperative might tell him that it is really obligatory upon all rational agents to follow such a life. It's not the case, because if you're doing it for that reason, you're still the aesthetic man, you're not the ethical man, because it is conceit of knowledge, it is your vanity, it is the pleasure or the pride that you derive from that which convinces you that you're the ethical individual. Because according to Kierkegaard, you cannot weigh the utility of these modes of being and then choose a specific mode of being. And this is precisely what I argue against in this book. I argue against this position that this transcendence of these modes requires faith and not rationality. I argue that it is not possible to know the utility and the importance of following these modes. For example, the ethical mode of being. The aesthetic man would not at all follow such a life, the ethical life, which requires him to sacrifice a great many things until and unless he knows the necessity of what it demands you to embody. I argue that ignorance is the root of all evil, and unless you realize the extent to which a man is capable of evil and the extent to which you yourself are capable of evil, you will not agree to embodying virtue, you will not agree to becoming a part of the ethical system, which is why I'm quite opposed to the Kierkegaardian view of the existential dialectic. Now, while that is how the aesthetic individual transcends to the ethical, many thinkers have proposed that to transcend from the ethical to the religious, you need a leap of faith that you cannot, through reason, believe in the existence of God. That is another thing which I argue against in this book. Not the only thing, but one of the many things which I argue against in this book. This skepticism, this materialism which these Western thinkers have been so attached to, it convinces them that transcendence is only to be attained through a leap of faith, and also that this leap of faith is so opposed to reason, and that it only fuels this binary between faith and reason which has been inherited from the Enlightenment thinkers. In this regard, I go through Johannes de Silentius paradox, which Kierkegaard proposes in his book Fear and Trembling, I think is the name. Yeah, he presents his paradox in Fear and Trembling, which is a biblical story of Abraham and his son and sacrifice that God demanded of him, which is mentioned in Genesis. Though it is also mentioned in the Islamic tradition, the accounts are a bit different. The names of the mounts are different. The names of the sons are different. One tradition says it was Ismail. Other tradition says it was Ishaq, who God commanded Abraham to sacrifice. Anyhow, I'll just discuss this. I discuss this paradox in the book, and I'll read. Johannes de Silentius paradox deals essentially with the contradiction inherent in the religious. The religious states that the single individual is higher than the universal, that the finite is higher than the infinite, that one must make the leap of faith by virtue of the absurd. Abraham suspended his obligation to the universal to fulfill his higher duty to God by being willing to sacrifice his son, there being a teleological suspension of the ethical in a way that the single individual now stands in an absolute relation to the absolute. But how can one conceptualize the ethical as the universal without the certainty of God's existence or non-existence that is necessary to craft the meaning of such terms? If God does not exist, there is no absolute duty to God, and the ethical then is the universal. But if God exists and there is an absolute duty to God, then there is not only a teleological suspension of the ethical, but also a metaphysical augmentation of the ethical itself, as the religious now becomes the rational, and all of one's actions are to be carried out keeping that as the first line of argument. And so Abraham's willingness to sacrifice his son denotes not a murderous act but a holy act, as the universal now expresses the religious, and Abraham's duty now becomes first and foremost to God and then to the common good. This worldly skepticism has tempted too many thinkers into separating the ethical and the religious, as if the two have always forged ahead independently, as if faith necessarily involves there being a departure from rationality, inclined towards a binary of reason and faith, perhaps owed to which Kierkegaard proposes his leap of faith. But if God exists, the irrational and the religious becomes the rational and the ethical, and so the leap of faith is a leap of faith no more, but a leap of reason. Was it not reason that convinced Abraham of God's existence? Was it not a leap of reason itself which, upon gazing at the stars and pondering over the creation of the universe, convinced Abraham that there had to be a single creator of the universe? He took a leap of reason by having faith in reason, and it was only after this initial leap of reason that his faith was put to the test. Why then must we not call Abraham the father of reason, much like we call him the father of faith? Here I argue against the position that it is not possible to believe in God's existence through reason alone, and it necessarily involves there being a leap of faith. And it is important to note here that what I mean by reason, my definition of reason is not the same definition of reason that these philosophers give. These these Western thinkers and this Western conception of rationality and reason is not my definition of reason. And I go through this in greater detail in the book, but here's a short glimpse of what I say in the book. The rationalist ideal claims that all truths, moral and natural, can be grasped through pure reason, as if the phenomenal is the nominal, as if the image is the real, as if the portrait without motive is the actual. What disgrace to reason itself! This dogmatic commitment to a materialist universe and naturalistic explanations for everything that exists assumes the non existence of the supernatural, and the very framework that it has built and within which it continues to operate persistently denies and excludes the immaterial only so conveniently. It is arrogance which convinces man that through the material the actual can be grasped in its totality without exclusions or contradictions, and it is no wonder then why he fails to understand at all. I do not present a critique of reason itself. I present a critique of what many philosophers and thinkers have called reason in the past, which by its very nature was flawed and incomplete and unable to give any answers, and only ever ends up refuting itself because of the very framework within which it operates. I then present my theory of the trifold sacrifice, which is a set of three sacrifices made by the aesthetic, the ethical, and the religious individual, and these sacrifices would never be made if not for reason, or if not for what reason demands. This individual has to sacrifice. He has to sacrifice the expedient for the actual. He has to sacrifice all falsehood for the truth. He has to sacrifice the familiar for the unfamiliar if he is to find the truth. And he has to also sacrifice the subjective for the objective if we believe that there is objective truth out there. Now, he, at this point in the book, this individual is going through reflection. He's going through a metamorphosis, you can say, where he's always believed in the non-existence of God because of the problem of evil, as I stated in the beginning. But then he thinks to himself, what if his parents might be wrong? What if all these philosophers, all these thinkers might have gotten it wrong? What if he himself might have gotten it wrong? So he starts to question his own biases, his own beliefs. And that is the part in the book where I present many arguments for the existence of God. I present the cosmological argument of Aristotle. I present the ontological arguments by Descartes, by Anselm, by Aquinas. I present Ibn Sina's contingency argument. I present Al-Ghazali's Kalam cosmological argument, and then I present my own proof for the existence of God. My proof for the existence of God is it's not an empirical proof. It's not of an empirical nature. It's of an experiential nature. It rests. It derives the existence of God through the existence of the soul, and it just stems from the fact that the soul and not the mind is the source of human consciousness. And now my aim in including these proofs in the book is to show how this individual comes to conclude either the non-existence or the existence of God through reason and not through a leap of faith. You can kind of see that progression towards the end of the ethical phase and the beginning of the religious phase, where it is through immense reflection and intellectual honesty with oneself that this individual comes to find the truth. It is not through a leap of faith. It is through a leap of reason, you can say. It is through reason and rationality that he comes to conclude that yes, God exists. Because obviously he cannot just at once deny the trajectory which his life has woven. That's not practical. A man who has for 40 years believed in the non-existence of God cannot at once just believe that God exists without any decisive event occurring or without some sort of experiential proof presenting itself to him, or without reason itself convincing him that he was wrong for all these 40 years. And so this again happens through a leap of reason. At this point in the book, this individual is stuck between reason and faith. He's stuck in the either or. He's stuck between the ethical and the not ethical. which in his view is the religious. The religious, because of the Johannes the Silencious paradox and the many things which the religious demands of man, which in my view are anything but inappropriate. But to this individual who wishes to understand before he believes, it does not make sense to him, and so he's still stuck in the either or. He does not wish to choose between faith and reason. He does not wish to choose between science and religion. He does not wish to choose between evolution and creationism, because choosing one entails abandoning the other, which he does not want to do. So I present the teleological argument in the book, the intelligent design argument, the fine-tuning argument, and this individual, you see this through a first-person perspective, how a person who has not given it much thought whether or not God exists comes to experience that when he looks at the stars, when he looks at the expanse of the universe and wonders to himself. I see all of these things intelligently designed. Must there not be an intelligent being who has created all that is? But at the same time, he's bound by his own rationality. Again, rationality which is not what I call rationality. It is the Western conception of rationality, which is only enchained to the material, to the material world. So this person is at the same time is bound by his rationality, and he thinks, must there be another explanation for this? Must there be some other explanation for the end directedness of these things, these planets that are orbiting in a fashion which makes life possible? So must there be some other explanation so that I can somehow avoid confronting the fact that God exists? He's still stuck in the either or. And then here at this point in the book, I present my grand unification theory, which is a theory which seeks to reconcile the differences between evolution and creationism. Now, the thing is that I do not myself believe in this theory anymore. I did for a very long time believe in this theory, but I do not believe in this theory anymore. I have this habit that when I'm researching on some specific thing, I write a draft, I write a paper, and then I detach myself from that area of research for a while, so that when I, after a while, come back to it, I can spot the errors in my premises, if any. And so a year ago, I was researching on this entire debate between evolution and creationism, whether it was God who made the universe or whether it was all just evolution. And I wrote the first draft, and I detached myself from the paper for a few weeks. After a few weeks, when I came back to it, I immediately spotted the errors in my premise, the first premise, and I made the mistake of presupposing the unification of the creator and the creation. I assumed that the creation and the creator were one, that they were not distinct, while in fact we know that the creator and the creation have to be distinct. The creator who created the universe, if he did create the universe, could not be subject to the same laws of physics which apply to the universe, because it is of his creation. He cannot be physically in the universe, he cannot be bound to space and time, he does not have a perception of time, which was my first premise of the argument. And so my argument was flawed. And now, why did I include this in the book? I included the argument in the book because, like this individual, a year ago, or perhaps 2 years ago, I think, less than 2 years ago, about 2 years ago, when I was researching on this, I was myself stuck in the either or. I did not wish to choose between faith and reason. I did not wish to choose between evolution and creationism. And so I was so desperate for answers that I created my own answer. There was no such answer that had existed at that point, at least for me, for my subjective experience. But I conjured up an answer, and that answer was not an answer. That only led to more and more questions when I got to understand how flawed my theory was. And so this individual who's towards the middle section of the book, going through this metamorphosis, going through this reflective and redemptive phase of his life, and he's about to step into the religious, into the domain of the religious. He's contemplating over whether or not God exists, whether it was just entirely evolution, whether God had a part in it, which is the entire creationism wala narrative. And he would go mad if he does not propose a theory which reconciles the two, which prevents him from choosing between the two. He does not wish to choose between the two. Like I said, choosing one would entail abandoning the other, and he does not want to do that. And so in this desperateness, he proposes this grand unification theory, and later he refutes his own theory. Like I said, this book is full of contradictions, but the progression is very important to note here. How he comes to believe, and through what more itself he does that. He does that through reason. And I've worked on this theory for a very long time. I gave it many months of my life, and I was very attached to this theory, this grand unification theory. I was like, I cracked it. Nobody could crack it. No philosopher, no theologian, no thinker in the past was able to crack it. And somehow a 23-year-old ignorant boy could somehow magically crack it. I was happy, to say the least, that I at last found an answer to this great query. I'm the sort of a person who likes certainty. I like certainty, and it's ironic how I'm engaged in this domain of philosophy, which has no answers, which has no certainties. Anyway, this thing which I did not take into consideration, I mentioned this thing, this refutation of my own theory towards the end of the book, when the religious individual is about to step into the domain of the spiritual, which we'll get to in a moment. Now, while this individual is searching for God and for the proofs of either his existence or non-existence, it is through reason that he steps into the domain of the into the domain of the religious, and not through a leap of faith, you can say. And here comes another of one of my theories, called the theory of the covenant. I firmly believe that all of us are on our own spiritual journey, whether or not we may realize it, but we are nonetheless on our spiritual path. And it is just that some things will not make sense to us. We will not be able to understand some things until we learn what we have to learn in order to understand these things. There are so many secrets of the universe, so many queries, so many mysteries of the universe, which we cannot find the answers to, at least until and unless we learn what being itself requires from us. And so this individual will not understand any of these mysteries until and unless he learns from what fate serves him, right? And so there are biases, there are predispositions, there are reluctances, there are tendencies which he has to get over if he has to find the truth. And he only needs three qualities if he has to find the truth. He needs to be curious, he needs to be intellectually honest with himself, and he also needs to be a seeker or a lover of truth. And in repeating that pattern an enough number of times, he eventually will reach the truth. If you remove all your biases, whatever remains must be, if not the truth, it must be close to the truth, right? And upon further seeking, you will eventually end up with the truth. So while this individual is searching for the proofs of God's existence and or non-existence, it is not only through reason. Like I said, I'm arguing that it is not a leap of faith but a leap of reason. But it is not only a leap of reason. It is God himself that guides this person, this non-believer, to believe in God, in the existence of God. Because I believe, like I said, my theory of the covenant, it just comes to show how the intellect by its very nature is limited. It cannot comprehend the immaterial, it cannot comprehend the infinite. Reason can take you to the gates of wisdom, to the gates of the truth, but only God himself can take you beyond that. It's as if it's fascinating how these thinkers, these Western thinkers, have always proposed this universal principle of rationality, as if they can uncover the secrets of the universe using only their reason. I go through this in much detail in the book, about how again their perception of reason and rationality, their definition of it is flawed. And if just like Johannes Silencius paradox, the what that individual calls the ethical is not the ethical. It is only their own conception of the ethical, because the ethical by its very nature cannot be so limited. It cannot be so limited to the material, because if a God exists, then all of his rules and all of his demands must be taken into consideration if the ethical and such a term is to be crafted. So reason, again, if a God exists, what was reasonable to us insofar as God did not exist cannot still continue to be reasonable for us. We have to renew this term itself. And so that is why I say my definition of rationality and reason is not the same as the Western conception of rationality. I further present my theory of the grand eternal return and the eternal return, which is both of them are closely related but not the same. And this theory of the eternal return, it's not the same as Nietzsche's conception of the eternal return. It is closely related to the covenant, and on a grander sense, it manifests itself into another one of my theories, the grand eternal return. It is something which I cannot explicitly state or talk about. I haven't for once mentioned it explicitly in the book, but I've only hinted towards it in bits and pieces throughout the book. You see it throughout the book, in the aesthetic phase, in the ethical phase, and the religious phase. But it's again one of the things which I want the reader to find out for himself. It's like the tragedy of the artist. I wrote a piece on it a while ago, how the artist, the composer, the writer, the musician, the comic, all these share a tragedy, and it is such that they hide in their work their intentions, some sort of a mystery which they want the audience to uncover. It's not so revealed that everyone finds it, yet it's not so concealed that no man ever finds it. But the audience only ever pays attention to the aesthetic. They only ever pay attention to what they derive pleasure out of from the work, and they do not look beneath the allegories, the brushstrokes, the whatever is manifest at first glance, such as, just like the beauty of the body is manifest, while the beauty of the soul is remains hidden from view. So I've presented my grand eternal theory in the book in a way that it amounts to no presentation. It's very concealed, but I still want the reader to find it out for himself. And again, like I said, it's something which is very unorthodox. It is something which is frowned upon even, I would say, and it is something again which I nevertheless firmly believe in. And it was important to kind of revolve the aim of this book around it. I have so many aims which I hope to achieve with this book. It's not that it only revolves around the sinful reluctance of Western thinkers to somehow submerge the faith and reason. It's not that I only wanted to present my proof for God's existence in this book. There are so many things which I wanted to do with this book. It contains over 8 to 10 of my original ideas, and all of them serve to become a part of a greater whole, and that whole is to be grasped in its entirety. Lastly, towards the end of the book, I show how this individual, this religious individual, steps into the domain of the spiritual, and this is my addition to the existential dialectic, because again I believe that the religious is not the same as the spiritual. Here is a short piece from a short writing from the book where I discuss this distinction between the religious and the spiritual. The difference between religion and spirituality is that of the heart and the soul. One knows, the other believes. One answers, the other questions. While one settles for the perceived ideal, the other hungers for more. One has conceit of knowledge, the other admits ignorance. The servant chants God, God with his mouth, but his heart is far away. He cleanses his body for ritual, yet his soul is impure. He disguises himself in the ways of the believers, yet his heart is unsatisfied. His tongue remembers the divine, yet his soul is still attached to the worldly. The difference is precisely that of love. Both cannot exist independently of each other, yet are not the same. Lastly, I explore several mystical concepts, such as the theory of the unity of being, or also known as Wahdatul Wajud by Ibn Arabi, which was proposed by Ibn Arabi. And it is not only exclusive to Sufi Islam, it can also be found in other mystical traditions or religions. It can be found in Hinduism by the name of Advaita Vedanta, if I'm pronouncing that correctly. It can also be found in Buddhism by the name of Advaya. And in the book, I mentioned several other theories, several other, I wouldn't say only Sufi ideas, but spiritual ideas, because these ideas again are not confined to Sufism. These can be found, these can be traced back to around 3,000 years ago, 3,500 years ago. It can be traced back to many other mystical traditions. Now that I've gone through some of the theories that I present in the book, I'd get back to the narrative, which this work is built upon, and for that I'll turn to the later part of the preface, which can make it easier for you to understand the narrative. It is not too long ago that I was pondering over this very thing. In wondering whether or not there is such a thing as luck, I was met without a doubt with an unexpected stroke of good luck. How is that so? My initial confusion over being and its modes was, I would not say resolved, but was diminished to the extent that I was at least able to imagine in my mind what it was that the aesthetic, the ethical, and the religious constituted, or what it was that constituted them. A certain diary came into my possession, the contents of which formed the contents of this book, and it is this that has aided me so, as I have just stated. Now, how did I come to acquire this diary? I do not think it necessary to divulge how it was that this diary came into my possession. Whether it is the case that it was given to me by the previous owner, or that I found it in some dusty old cabinet somewhere, makes no difference to the essential narrative, which alone, in its entirety, at times too confusing but of great interest nonetheless, I have intended to direct the reader's attention to, and away from whatever may cause them to lose sight of that which demands inquiry and understanding. It is no doubt that what I choose to withhold with regards to its history does indeed hold some significance on its own, and is necessary insofar as my relation to it and my motive in choosing to publish it is concerned, but it is beyond that indeed of no use, for in no way does it contribute to the whole or aid the reader in their understanding of the contents. It is for this reason that I choose not to share with you how I came to acquire this diary, but instead urge you to detach from this piece of information at once. When this diary came into my possession and I had acquainted myself with its contents to the extent that I was not entirely unsure, yet not too certain of what it was that it essentially revolved around, I found myself in a state of great fascination and admiration. There is no greater treasure than the words of a man or a woman, written in private for their own eyes alone. How fascinating it is to glimpse the thoughts and musings of another, to witness their joys and sorrows, their triumphs and defeats, all laid bare upon the page. Indeed, What wondrous tales can be found within the pages of a diary? Therein lie the secrets of the heart, the hopes and fears, the loves and hates, and the raw emotions that reveal the writer's being, a window into the soul. But this is not the only reason why this diary in particular fascinates me. It seems to me that it had been in the possession of three different individuals. As absurd as it may seem, the writings in the diary differ too greatly from one another to be written by one individual. It is a book of contradictions. I will not abuse my capacity as an editor by revealing too much at once. You soon shall see what I mean. This diary has given me the opportunity to gain an insight into the lives of three men which greatly resemble the aesthetic, the ethical, and the religious lives. I will not say that I have benefited from it, for claiming that assumes that I have understood its contents in their entirety, and that I certainly have not so far. But it is true that the accounts of these three men have at least discerned for me the is from the is not. I know not the names of these three individuals, nor anything of them, except that each possessed the diary for a certain while and wrote in it their thoughts and the occurrences in their lives. For this reason, I will refer to the first possessor as A, the second as B, and the third as C. A's writings appear towards the beginning of the book, B's towards the center, and C's towards the end. The first possessor of this diary, A, is the aesthetic individual who to me is a very interesting character. A lover of experiences and appearances, a lover of sensations, and an admirer of the aesthetic. His being, it seems, was itself an attempt to realize the task of living poetically. It is in seeking one pleasure after the next that is sought the cure to the tragic, which in his view is intrinsic to being. It seems that the root of all activity to which he devoted himself, with a wavering will at times, was boredom. For boring of one thing, he thirsted for the next, and in this transition, for a while, he was redeemed until he was made to set his eyes on the next object of desire, which would renew his joys. He constantly sought to reproduce the same experiences, the same sensations, the same joys, and it is in this that he mastered the art of living poetically. What is dangerous of such a man is not the poetic element he has attained for himself, but that he has replaced it with what is necessary to living ethically. We see this very thing reflected in his writings. I will again, in my capacity as an editor, leave you to find this out for yourself. What remains, however, for such a man is only madness. His aesthetic character was his punishment, and to this there was no escape. A differs from B precisely because of this. It is guilt and conscience that sets them apart. B is the embodiment of virtue, and in this he is the ethical individual. It seems that he was burdened with the guilt of having not been so in the past, and it is this that drove his compliance. It is interesting how some are drawn to the good precisely because it deserves to be sought and embodied, while others do so because of the guilt of embodying the opposite with an intensity which was only to be coupled with the good. B was constantly renewing himself, reflecting, pondering, always redeeming himself in the light of reason, which itself he developed through reflection. What sets him apart from A is the choice that he made between the good and the expedient. It is not the case that man knows not the good or has never sought it, but that all men know in their doings and their sayings the morality of these doings and sayings, but it is only because of the lack of insight into the ethical value that they err. The life that A had chosen for himself would not have been chosen if he knew it's in entirety what such a life entailed, and as this is presented to us in later in B's writings, B would not have continued on the life that he had chosen for himself if he had not realized later, but soon enough, the intrinsic value to it. Another thing that sets B apart from A is his humble uncertainty with which he continued to discover and rediscover everything, including the good. A seems quite upright in his beliefs and opinions, as if he had sought and found the good, and there was no more a need for seeking, while B wrote as if he was simultaneously writing and living the experience, as if he was constantly rediscovering himself through his experience, and wrote as new pieces of information revealed themselves to him, never ceasing to look further and doubting his own capacity to perceive the good. C, it seems, differs from both A and B with respect to reason. Reason for him meaning something entirely different as for A and B, and it is through this that he enters into the domain of the religious. I will leave you to figure out for yourself precisely what the religious entails, not because I do not wish to reveal too much too soon, but because I myself do not understand much of what has been written by C towards the end of the diary. It is here that my reason does not permit me to look, and if someday I change my mind, I will gladly return to C's writings to reflect on what earlier I could not understand. Now, the very nature of the writings in this diary point to the fact that they were written as reflections not for the general public but only for the writers to return to at a later point in time, or perhaps meant as a retreat from the world, something to find refuge in every once in a while, not serving any ulterior purpose and definitely not intended for publication. I know not what these three individuals would say on my publishing the contents of the diary, but I have from their writings only an idea of what that would be. A is like that old man who wants not to enter the haunted building, but it is the curiosity and the thrill of the unknown that causes another to enter nonetheless. He would, if he got news of my publishing his private work, probably say, I am the poet and I am the muse. I am the gesture and I am the joke. I am the answer and I am the paradox. How unjust is the observer in believing my existence to be a happy one. I am the abyss. Oh, do you not believe me? Wish not for what you know not, for you may wish for what is good for you, but gain the opposite. Fool that I was and fool that you are, you will know it when you live it, and the world is indeed full of fools. B would respond with the importance of knowing the ethical itself in order to transcend, and that there is only the either or. There is no third and no in between. So the decision needs to be made, and there is no living both modes, but one must be chosen and lived by. Hence, it is only necessary for men to read and to know, so that they can discern the good from the not good. As for C, I am unsure what he would say of my publishing his work, in particular the secrets of which he so ardently speaks. I do not understand him at all. I do not know whether you too, dear reader, would be able to uncover C's secret, but let me now divulge mine to you. Yes, let me make known to you what I have thus far kept from you. The diary of which I am the current possessor belonged before me not to three but to only one individual whose writings form the contents of this book, and my presenting him to you as A, B, and C only served the purpose of emphasizing on reading this book as if it was written by three different individuals with three different life views. It is only necessary if the work is to be understood. And then again, after this, realizing that this is not the work of three but only one individual is necessary too if the whole is to be grasped in its entirety. As this work belongs to one single author, I do not feel the need to specify when each of the set of writings containing the aesthetic, the ethical, and the religious life views begins and ends. They have been arranged in one long series of short and at times longer pieces of writings in the same manner, in the same order in which they were written in the diary. The last page of the diary is the last page of this book, and I fear the individual may have gotten another diary altogether to write into, and so we have been robbed of not only what would have followed, but any clarifications or observation he may have chosen to note down in the future, which may have aided us in our understanding of the narrative, especially that which is developed towards the end. I feel I have bored you for too long with my reflections. It is now time to turn to the contents of the diary.